Good evening, everybody. I'll make a start again with the microphone on. I'd like to welcome you to the new Draft Willoughby LEP and DCP webinar this evening that's focusing particularly on Chatswood CBD and Chatswood as a neighbourhood. My name is Norma Shanky-Williams and I head up the strategic planning team here at Council. To begin proceedings, I wish to acknowledge the traditional inhabitants of the land on which we stand, the Aboriginal people, their spirits and ancestors. We acknowledge the vital contribution that Indigenous people and cultures have made and still make to the nation that we share, Australia. I'd like to now pass to a short video, which is a really useful little introduction to the work we're doing on the LEP and DCP. So we'll cue the video.
Willoughby is a wonderful place to live. It is a city of diversity with beautiful landscapes, people, and of course our vibrant CBD.
Willoughby is a very diverse place. It has an important centre at Chatswood. It has some really much loved and very successful local centres.
Our residents really value our beautiful bushlands and of course our urban environment and our CBD.
It has a range of housing, quite a number of apartments and also a lot of lower density areas. It has important heritage precincts.
Willoughby City Council is committed to delivering a city that is green, livable, inclusive, connected, prosperous and vibrant. Over the last 5 years, we've engaged with the community to help us develop the local environment plan.
The local environment plan, commonly called the LEP, is the planning instrument which actually sets the framework for future development.
In 2012, we created the local environment plan to help us plan and decide what is built and where in Willoughby.
That's been proposed for change, significant changes. For example, in Chatswood, it is an important commercial place for the whole of the district, and even within Sydney, it has a key role. We want to make sure that's facilitated and expanded into the future. But it's hoped and anticipated that Chatswood will grow to be an even more important commercial centre than it isn't at this point in time. You will see in the LEP some major changes to the heights for commercial buildings and also the introduction of more apartment buildings close to the services around the Chatswood CBD.
It also covers affordable housing, environmental issues and bushfire hazards. The local environment plan outlines subdivision sizes, heights of buildings and the amount of floor space area on which you can build. The plan allocates land for specific purposes through zoning and sets standards for development. It aims to provide jobs and housing growth, more medium and high density living, as well as strengthening the character of our CBD. It will help us design our homes for the future. It helps us guide conservation of cultural heritage as well as protect environmentally sensitive land. It helps us create a better place to live with more trees and connected pathways and cycleways.
We also want to link one green space to the other green space so that it's not just isolated green spaces and recreation opportunities, but they can be a network where they can be readily reached by foot, not needing to take a car. They're opportunities that we need to try to grow into the future. While COVID has thrown up some uncertainty about the pace of change, we do know that cities do grow. Willoughby is a very desirable place in the Greater Sydney area. Sydney is a very desirable city. It will grow into the future.
The plan helps us to set our strategic vision for the future.
Being prepared is important and planning ahead is crucial.
So as you saw, that featured the Mayor Tanya Taylor and Dr. Deborah Deering, who's our North District Commissioner for the GSC. And it can be viewed anytime you like on the Have Your Say section of the Council website. So that's good to know. You can come back to it at a later point. So that's for your information. Now, the webinar will run this evening with a few presenters. I'll be kicking off tonight, first of all, and then I'll be handing over to a colleague from the Northern Sydney Local Health District, Queenie Stafford, who will take you through some issues about healthy built environments. My colleague Craig O'Brien will then take over and talk about Chatswood CBD particularly, and Ian Arnott will follow with some more general slides in relation to the other changes for the LEP and DCP, particularly residential areas. And I will close hopefully this evening tonight promptly on 7:30. There'll be some common slides in this webinar. So if you watched the webinar a couple of weeks ago, you'll see some commonality in those slides, but that's providing the messaging that's consistent and the context that's consistent. We've got about 300 people registered, over 300 tonight on the webinar. So I welcome you on the webinar. We have some people in the chamber as well here tonight who've gone against the weather and managed to come here and join us in person, so I'm very pleased to see that. And it's a bit of a hybrid approach that we're following here with some people in person and some, of course, on the webinar. You can submit your question at any time on the Q&A function on the Zoom link that you're on. So please do that at any time, and we will try and respond to your questions during the webinar if they're particularly straightforward. If not, we'll get back to you within 10 working days and give you a response to the questions at that point. The verbal questions can be asked at the end. We'll have some question time at the end of the presentation. So we'll take a question from the chamber and alternate with a question from the webinar, if that's the way it flows naturally. We'll see how we go with that. So any feedback or comments that are not questions, please put those in the chat section of the Zoom call that we're on at the moment. And the webinar is being recorded, I should remind you of that, and will be available on Have Your Say at the end of tomorrow. So anybody who's asking questions in the chamber, you note that it will be recorded and you will be seen and heard, as it were. And I'd like to welcome Councillors Robert Samuel and Councillor Campbell tonight, who are joining us on the webinar, I understand. So the agenda, well, I'll provide a bit of strategic planning background to give you some context to all this work we've been doing, and talk about some changes the state government have been making. They've been very busy in the reform area, I should say. And then we'll have the local health district talk about creating a healthy built environment, as I mentioned before, and when Queenie Stafford will talk to us. And then we'll look specifically at the changes for Chatswood CBD that Craig will talk us through. And then Ian will talk about the draft LEP and DCP generally for residential areas and around the Chatswood CBD, in particular Chatswood West. Then there'll be time for questions, and then we'll close at 7:30. So some headline changes that we're seeing in this LEP, just to give you a flavour. We're growing Chatswood CBD to the north and the south along the railway corridor, in line with the Cbd strategy that Council has already adopted and publicly exhibited. We're trying to increase densities too in local centres around local shopping areas, in line with our local centre strategy that was also adopted by Council and publicly exhibited. This would be an opportunity to get more housing and jobs locally in our number of local centres across Willoughby. In industrial areas, we're looking to stimulate innovation and investment by providing height and density initiatives in the industrial areas. That's in line with an industrial strategy that we also worked on in previous years. There'll be a new design excellence requirement and an increase, that's to make sure that we get the top quality design on new buildings in Willoughby, and increase affordable housing in line with the Greater Sydney Commission's aspirations from 4% to 10%, because we know affordable housing is a really key issue for all councils across New South Wales, indeed, not just Sydney. There'll be alignment of our residential controls proposed with the state government code set, which is the complying development state policy that allows certain developments to be done in line with standards that are set. And we're trying to align our own controls with those to make for a less complicated system and a more fair and equitable system. And we're including landscaping controls in our LEP this time. We're proposing, rather than the DCP, to give them more strength when they're being applied. Under the development control plan, we're strengthening our heritage controls, and we're also reducing our parking requirements, particularly in railway precincts such as Artarmon and Chatswood and St Leonard's. And we have 12 weeks we've allocated for this exhibition. So we hope that will provide sufficient time for people to be able to consider the controls and proposals and make submissions to us that we can then consider if any changes need to be made. You can see from the little map there that most of the changes are in fact proposed for Chatswood and for those local centres areas that I spoke about earlier. This is a rather complicated diagram. I won't dwell on it. It shows the process that we followed to get to this point, which is the red square where we're on exhibition. It shows that we've done strategic planning work already to prepare for this. And we've brought that together in what's called a local strategic planning statement that all councils were required to deliver under the Greater Sydney Commission to align with our North District Plan. And we've provided that information and that's informed our draft LEP, our planning proposal, as it's called, that's now on exhibition. And we've had advice from our local planning panel, the Willoughby local planning panel, to say, yes, this draft plan is good enough for exhibition. Let's go to exhibition, reported to council. We got our approval from the state government to go on exhibition. And so here we are basically on exhibition with the community, asking for your comments on and seeking your response to what we're proposing. The current LEP, which is from 2012, started its work in 2006. We started working on it 6 years before it was made. We hope that's not going to be this long this time. We hope we're actually going to be much quicker this time. But it shows that they're not easy and slow and quick processes. They are quite complicated processes to get LEPs in place. And we've now had over 20 amendments to this LEP, so it's time for a refresh and a restart, we believe. I talked about the local strategic planning statement before. This followed the issue of the district plan by the Greater Sydney Commission in 2018, and all councils are required to align their local planning to their district plan that applies to them. It sets the 20-year vision for Willoughby with priorities and actions for the entire local government area and is very comprehensive. It covers actions that are to do with housing, transport, heritage, health and livability, economy and employment. All those issues are covered in the local strategic planning statement, and all of them we're trying to deliver as much as we can through the statutory instrument of the LEP and the council's DCP. And that's not an easy task, I have to say. The basis for the new draft LEP was drawn from the work we've done and the strategies that I referred to earlier. So we had our local centre strategy, our Chatswood CBD strategy, the industrial lands. Work was done on St Leonard's Crow's Nest by the state government, and they worked with the 3 local governments that impinge on the St Leonard's strategic centre. We have our own housing strategy and our own integrated transport strategy, and all that has informed our LEP and DCP now. We also have a resilience Willoughby strategy and action plan, which is a very important document, as we will all recognise, from the shocks and stresses that we're enduring in the world at the moment. The basis is of the new draft LEP that relies on the resilient Willoughby strategy strives for resilient places and resilient buildings. We want places that can withstand climate change and sustain biodiversity and be vibrant and connected for the communities that live there. So we're trying to provide that resilience through our planning controls. And resilient buildings which are safe and well designed and affordable and sustainable. We all aspire to this. It's not an easy task, but that's exactly what we're trying to do through our new draft LEP and DCP. In terms of the key statistics that you might be aware of or be interested in seeing in terms of growth for Willoughby, in terms of population, we're expecting to grow from 78,000 people in 2016 to almost 92,000 in 2036. So that's a growth of 14,000 people. We're not a huge council in the metropolitan stakes, but we're still a significant council. The number of dwellings is expected to grow by over 6,700. So that's how many homes we're trying to deliver between now and 2036. And that was the focus of our local housing strategy, to try and deliver the key focus areas for new housing. We had a 5-year dwelling target that was set by the Greater Sydney Commission in the district plan, and we've met that. That was a 1250 5-year dwelling target. The number of jobs in Willoughby is expected to grow from 64,000 to over 74,000 in 2036, with a particular jobs target for Chatswood, as well as St Leonard's. But for us, Chatswood is the key strategic centre for us. And that's got a jobs target of 6,000 to 8,300. And we're trying to deliver that with our new CBD strategy. Just before we move on beyond the context setting, there have been some state changes to zones, to environmental zones, which have already happened On December the 1st in 2021, the state government renamed environment zones to conservation zones and renumbered them effectively, or re-lettered them, if you could call it that. So instead of having our E zones, as they used to be called, we have new conservation zones in our LEPs now, which are C zones. And most of those are represented in Willoughby, apart from C3, which is the environmental management zone. We also have some state delivered changes to our employment zones, our industrial and business zones. And these are currently happening. They are currently on exhibition with our draft LEP. They are essentially name changes, but a little bit more than that, with the uses that are suggested for each of these zones slightly changing. We're trying to align and make the transition as smooth as possible, but you may be interested to look at some of those changes. They're replacing the existing business and industrial zones with 5 new employment zones and 3 supporting zones under this standard LEP that we all work to in New South Wales. So those transition details are on exhibition at the moment as well. So you might want to have a look at those and see how they relate to what we are going to be doing in terms of our new employment zones. Now I'm going to hand over to Queenie, and she's going to talk us through creating a healthy built environment in Willoughby. So I'll hand over to Queenie and move my chair.
Hi, good evening. My name's Queenie Stafford and I'm from Northern Sydney Local Health District. Firstly, thank you to Willoughby Council for having us this evening to share some of our insights into healthy built environments. So if you haven't heard of Northern Sydney Local Health District, you're probably quite familiar with hospitals and clinics. We're part of the population health preventative arm of New South Wales Health, where we're trying to prevent people from getting sick in the first place at a population health basis. And that's why we work quite closely with local councils to influence and advocate for healthier built environments. So tonight we meet here to discuss 2 important documents that will shape Willoughby and the lives of those who live and work here for now and many years to come. So it's a really exciting opportunity to look at how we can be also prepared for what's to come, you know, things like COVID that we were never prepared for. How can we make ourselves more resilient to that? So by the way of background, when we refer to the built environment, what I mean is the human-made spaces in which we live, work and play on a daily basis. Our homes, yes, oh, I can do that. Yeah, thank you. So our homes, our buildings, our streets, sidewalks, transport corridors, and so on. So in this short presentation, we're going to talk about the connection between built environment and our physical health, and also our mental health and social well-being. So just to begin and get people thinking about this topic, those for you that are online and those for you at here with us tonight, can you think of somewhere that you've lived for a while, or where you live now, or cities you've lived in? What made it really, you know, a great place to live? What made it really healthy? Perhaps it's somewhere, so feel free to put your responses on the chat. I'd love to hear what comes to mind to you. For example, I remember living in Edinburgh in a 300-year-old apartment with no garage, so not many cars around, and in front of a beautiful meadows, the Green Meadows. So I just found myself walking a lot during that time. So I'd love to hear from you. Do you have any memories of great places you've lived in? So we'll come back to that at the end of my presentation, and I'm sure that we'll discuss this along the way. So feeling healthy isn't just about being fit or going to the gym. It's not about just having a healthy diet, but it's also being able to spend time and socialize and connect with your family and friends, and also your community. And not many people sort of realize that, you know, where you live has a huge influence on that. You know, does your local community have community facilities that you can walk to, or, you know, get to easily for you to participate in your community? So just being living in a community doesn't mean you're participating. So you have to have that opportunity to connect with people around you. So what we know is that not all built environments are created equal, and the environments in which we live have a profound impact on our physical and mental health. And what it really does is try to make you make the healthy choice the easier choice. In population health, we don't blame the individual for making bad choices about their health. What we try and do is we change the environment so that we make walking easier, choosing healthy foods easier by changing the environment. An excellent resource that talks about this is the Healthy Built Environment Checklist. This document was written by New South Wales Health for health practitioners like us who may not be familiar with the planning side of things, to understand how the different dimensions of our built environments can actually influence health. It's like a book about that thick, and it's got a lot of research from over the years about how people living in different environments, studies of people living in compact cities, sprawling cities, how their health has been affected and their health outcomes. So you can see, I won't read out all the aspects, but you can see that it's very multidimensional, that the built environment is not just sidewalks and trees. We'll focus on three particular aspects, is targeting the healthy neighbourhood design. So what ties these themes together is the concept of healthy neighbourhood design, and how healthy neighbourhood design is facilitated by land use and development decisions, as informed by documents like the local health environmental plans, development control plans, which prioritise complete, compact and connected communities. So basically we want communities that support recreational and physical activity along safe, well-connected tree-lined streets and paths. We want to facilitate social interactions, you know, when you're walking your dog. If you've got parks to walk your dog to, then you're more likely to bump into a neighbour and have these connections. We want our communities to be able to support local jobs so that you don't have to travel an hour and a half on a train to get to your work, come back exhausted and have no time to spend with your family. So we need that strong public transport infrastructure and the local jobs and community to create that vibrant neighbourhood. The other thing also is the nighttime economy, because you'll know, if you've ever travelled overseas, you'll notice that it's very vibrant at night. Some cities are very vibrant at night, whereas we are still sort of learning to turn on the lights in some of our cities. So being able to be active day and night, because you'll think, you know, overseas they're still playing ball games at night time in the public square, whereas we tend to sit, you know, be inside sitting watching our TVs. In terms of thinking about equity, not everyone can afford to have coffee at a coffee shop, to sit out, to enjoy the outdoors. You know, in times of COVID, some people have lost their jobs, so they may, you know, a bus ride to go to, okay, we've got some interesting apartments. If you could refrain from profanities, that would be much appreciated. I'm sure this chat is being moderated. Thank you. So I think thinking about, we want to make access to a healthy community equitable, that even if you're in a pram, in a wheelchair, or you use a walking stick, you should be able to access different areas of your neighbourhood. So you can see we really want to support that vibrancy of community, and this is how different examples illustrate that. And zoning, looking at the zoning and development controls, which can facilitate complete and compact connected communities, can promote all those things we talked about buying. So for example, you can see here that we've located schools, libraries, community centres, close with shops with high density housing. We want the primary local traffic to be around those compact neighbourhoods rather than through, because we don't want cars to be zooming through streets where people walk and reduce the sense of safety. So this is how, you know, we hope that zoning can help create these planning healthy neighbourhoods. So one of the focus on of this LEP will be about housing. So from a health perspective, the research is clear that the healthiest neighbourhoods are usually more compact. It's got more diversity of housing types, ranging from apartments to medium townhouses. So having that choice of housing also allows people to stay within their community. So for example, when your adult children move out, then they can stay close by to live close to their parents and maintain that social network. So especially in this market where housing affordability is an issue, having diverse housing types is really important. So the word density can sometimes be a bit of a concern for people, but what we know is high density housing that's well designed and well located can actually help to accommodate the future population growth, because our population is just going to continue to grow and we need to find ways to accommodate people of all income levels, of all backgrounds. And through zoning and best practice development controls, we're finding that apartment designs are really exceeding our expectations, that we're seeing some really clever designs where they respect the idea of maintaining greenery. So with all this said, as our city becomes more compact, we need to invest a lot more into public open spaces, because when we have access to quality open space within distance where people live and work, we know that there's a range of positive health outcomes. So for example, time spent in green space reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes, heart disease, premature death, preterm birth, stress and high blood pressure. And of course, green and natural vegetation contributes to a healthy planet. So what we don't want to see is that loss of greenery. So this leads me to talk about an important aspect that's gaining a lot of attention, which is environmental sustainability and climate change. So we really want to reduce the urban heat island that we've observed over the years, where it's been too hot to even walk outside. Great if you can afford to turn on your air conditioning all the time and don't mind a high electricity bill. But if you don't have that sort of income, that causes a range of stresses, physical stress and financial stress. So, you know, this is important part of making sure that we incorporate sustainable designs into housing and design. So that concludes my part of the presentation. So I hope that sort of set the scene for you in terms of thinking about, with Willoughby City Council's planning, how we can create a healthier neighbourhood and incorporate some of the great things that you have thought about when I asked that question about what's a healthy neighbourhood to you. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, Queenie. That was very helpful. And I must say that these are the sorts of issues that are influencing the way we're planning for our LEP and DCP right now. So I think it's very important to have heard from the local health district in this way. Thank you. And now I'm going to hand over to Craig O'Brien, who will talk to us about the proposals we have for Chatswood CBD based on the strategy.
Thank you, Norma. Hello, my name is Craig O'Brien, and I'm a strategic planner who does a lot of work within the Chatswood CBD. The Chatswood CBD is identified in the North District Plan as a major strategic centre. The status of Chatswood as a strategic centre under the North District Plan requires strategic planning to manage growth, particularly in commercial, retail and other employment development to 2036 and beyond, and to ensure a balanced CBD regarding land use and a desirable urban environment. In late 2016, Willoughby City Council engaged a planning and urban design company to prepare a planning and urban design study of the Chatswood CBD. This was supported by traffic and transport advice and further economic advice. Specifically, this study reviewed the current planning framework that controls the development of the Chatswood CBD. It identified opportunities and constraints that impacted the development within the Chatswood CBD and developed and recommended a planning framework to ensure Chatswood sustainably could grow as a competitive strategic centre. The study became the basis of the Chatswood CBD Planning and Urban Design Strategy 2036, referred to ongoing as the Cbd Strategy. The Cbd Strategy aims to achieve a reinvigorated commercial core area and an economically buoyant CBD to provide future employment. It aims to achieve a sustainable balance between commercial, retail, residential, education, cultural and other uses to ensure ongoing vibrancy. It aims to achieve a green, compact, walkable CBD, a healthy, livable neighbourhood, a city form and scale to accommodate future growth and change, a CBD of exceptional urban design, and a place where people want to visit and invest in. The Cbd Strategy requires expression in a set of controls in both the Draft Local Environmental Plan and Draft Development Control Plan, which are both currently on public exhibition. As already noted, preparing the Cbd Strategy began in late 2016. This went on public, I'm unwittingly pressing. Thank you. The public exhibition occurred in early 2017 with significant public engagement. Council then endorsed the Cbd Strategy on the 26th of June 2017. Council engaged with the Greater Sydney Commission and support was provided on the 18th of May 2018. Partial Department of Planning endorsement was provided on the 9th of August 2019. The department at that time required a further review of the Cbd Strategy, which happened through 2019 and 2020. The review had particular regard to the CBD interface areas with low density residential conservation areas, in particular having regard to appropriate built scale and overshadowing impacts. At the same time, a heritage study was done. This resulted in reduced height and FSR along these areas from what was originally proposed in the Cbd Strategy. The review also included the one-to-one commercial floor space requirement in the B4 mixed-use zone. It was concluded that the one-to-one commercial component was viable. The review also included further work in consultation with Transport for New South Wales to ensure that the transport network was able to accommodate the population increase under the strategy. This resulted in a report which concluded that the future transport network will be able to accommodate the demand from the Cbd Strategy. That's the Future Conditions report that's on the Council website. On the 9th of July 2020, the Cbd Strategy was endorsed by the Department of Planning, who supported the conclusions of the review undertaken. On the 14th of September, Council noted the updated Cbd Strategy based on the review undertaken, and Council also noted the Department of Planning endorsement. These slides are intended to show some of the Cbd strengths that exist. The slides on the left-hand side of the screen show the Cbd significant public transport infrastructure that exists. As you would all know, the CBD benefits from the transport interchange. There is heavy rail, metro services and bus services that link to the northern beaches. Within close proximity is a lively commercial, retail, restaurant and residential centre. The slides on the right show the CBD's significant cultural infrastructure. The concourse is a major cultural hub in the heart of the CBD, attracting visitors and locals both during the day and in the evenings. It provides space for performing arts, community celebrations and civic ceremonies. It houses the Chatswood Library, concert hall, theatre, civic pavilion and studio with surrounding restaurants, cafes and open space. The Chatswood CBD plays a vital cultural role, not only in Willoughby, but throughout the lower North Shore and beyond, attracting a diversity of cultural groups. Other existing CBD strengths. On the left-hand side of the screen, we have a strong commercial presence. There is identifiable office core in the Chatswood CBD with particular reference to the western side of the North Shore rail line. However, this office core has been under pressure from residential land use and is also limited in its opportunities to grow. The need has been identified to grow the commercial core in order to protect and increase office and other employment to 2036. And this is consistent with the CBD being a strategic centre. Also on the left-hand side of the page is evidence of retail, and retail has long been a strength of Chatswood. On the right-hand side, we have, there's a variety of non-residential uses in the CBD, medical related uses, professional services, service departments have also contributed to the vibrant centre. In addition, there's state government approved slim residential towers, which is the urban form that's sought under the CBD strategy. The diverse mix of land uses within the CBD, which includes residential, retail, office and other uses, are considered a strength. A challenge for the CBD is to balance employment and residential land uses. A weakness is the erosion of the commercial core by residential development. Other strengths within the CBD currently has a small number of pocket parks, green spaces and paved spaces that encourage community to relax, gather and engage. Chatswood Mall is a key public space in this regard. Fine-grained character is also shown in various forms, such as shop fronts in Chatswood Mall, public art and functional features such as street railing and seating. A challenge in the face of significant growth is the appropriate maintenance of existing public domain and the provision of new public domain. The last strengths that I wanted to show today was that the CBD is within close walking distance to major open space, being Chatswood Park and Oval, which is within the CBD boundary, and Beecham Park, which is just outside the CBD boundary. These slides, or this slide, shows an illustration of the future envisaged Pacific Highway, and it seeks to build on existing strengths and improve on where we can do better. These slides show street wall heights reflecting the precinct within the CBD that's envisaged, ground level setbacks reflecting the precinct within the CBD that's envisaged, tower setbacks above the podiums that reflect the precinct that's envisaged, planting and greening, including to the Pacific Highway, and on the right-hand side, in regards laneways, a revitalisation of laneways and streets by activation and not having blank walls and street level parking and loading. This slide shows an illustration of Victoria Avenue or Chatswood Mall. The envisaged future for Chatswood Mall is vitality to be maintained, its connection with the transport interchange to be enhanced and maintained, ensure appropriate surrounding built scale, ensure the key public space is protected with regards to solar access, and encourage pedestrian movement through the CBD, with Chatswood Mall being the central spine. In regards to Albert Avenue, the CBD strategy seeks a new vision. It seeks to encourage different development to what is existing at the moment. It encourages street activation, commercial and retail development, appropriate setbacks, street wall heights again, and a human scale, a place where people want to go. So in regards the transition of the CBD strategy to the LEP, the 35 key elements of the CBD strategy are being incorporated into either the LEP or the DCP. In regards growing the CBD strategy, there has been an extension to the CBD boundary, noting that there are limitations in regards the surrounding low density residential conservation areas. The areas of expansion have involved, generally speaking, mixed and high density locations, north and south of the existing CBD boundary on the eastern side of the Pacific Highway. No conservation area is part of the expansion. Where expansion has been identified, this has resulted in land use change to B4 mixed use with accompanying FSR and height increases. The land use in the CBD strategy has been transferred to the draft LEP on exhibition. There is no change from the CBD strategy. The existing B3 commercial core has been retained. This is the blue area on the map that's before you on the screen. Residential is not permissible as a use under the LEP 2012, and it is not permissible under the proposed LEP. The commercial core is intended to provide for employment growth close to public transport and services in an optimum urban environment. This is reflected in changes to objectives in the draft LEP, emphasising in the B3 commercial core zone employment opportunities and enhancing the visual appearance of the area by ensuring new development achieves high architectural, urban design and landscape standards. Residential provision is recognised within the CBD and is a permissible use in the light purple area shown on the map. This area is within the CBD boundary as expanded, but around the B3 commercial core. It is still within 800 metres walking distance of the transport interchange. The B4 mixed use land allows for the growth of non-residential development, generally within the podium. It is expected that this will allow for different offerings than the B3 commercial core. Providing a mix of non-residential offerings within the overall CBD is consistent with the objective of providing variety and growing employment within the CBD. In regards to FSR, the FSR in the CBD strategy has been transferred again to the draft LEP. There is no change from the CBD strategy. In the commercial core, in order to encourage commercial development, a no maximum FSR is proposed, which it should be noted is subject to the height control as well as setbacks and other strategy requirements. In the main part of the B4 mixed use zone, the FSR proposed is 6:1, with affordable housing being included in that FSR, not in addition to. Following the review required by the Department of Planning, the FSR is lower in interface areas or CBD boundary areas adjacent low density residential conservation areas. In regards to the FSR, a transitional approach to the CBD boundary was supported by the Department of Planning. Streets where height and FSR reductions occurred include Johnson Street, Bertram Street, the eastern part of Albert Avenue, Olga Street, and Anderson Street. For Johnson Street, the FSR is between 3.2 to 1 and 3.7 to 1. For Bertram Street, the FSR is between 3.7 to 1 and 5 to 1. For the eastern part of Albert Avenue and Olga Street, the FSR is 2.7 to 1. For Anderson Street, the FSR is between 4 to 1 and 6 to 1. The reason for the differences in FSR along the interface or CBD boundary areas, with particular regard to the South Chatswood Conservation Area, has to do with overshadowing and solar access impacts to the south. In regards height, the CBD strategy has been transferred to the draft LEP. There is no change from the CBD strategy. In the commercial core, in order to encourage commercial development, a height of RL 246.8 metres is proposed, approximately 150 metres. This height is based on airspace limits being the Panzops plane. In the main part of the B4 mixed-use zone, the FSR proposed is 90 metres. I draw your attention to the yellow shaded area in the middle of the map. Height in part of both the B3 commercial core and B4 mixed-use zone is subject to solar access protection to key public spaces. This is addressed in a clause in the draft LEP. This means that on affected sites, the maximum height may not be able to be achieved and that lower heights would be required to maintain solar access to these key public sites. The key public sites or spaces to be protected from additional overshadowing are Victoria Avenue between the interchange and Archer Street between 12 and 2 p.m, the Concourse open space between 12 and 2 p.m, the Garden of Remembrance between 12 and 2, the Tennis and Croquet Club area between 12 and 2, and Chatswood Oval between 11 and 2. Protection of solar access to these key public spaces is considered important at the same time as the increases to density and height. This is to ensure that the CBD remains a desirable location with highly usable and attractive key public spaces. The height is lower in interface areas, adjacent low-density residential conservation areas. Streets where height is reduced is similar to where the FSR is reduced that I have just explained. For Johnson Street, the height is reduced to between 11 and 44 metres instead of 90. For Bertram Street, the height is from 23 metres. For the eastern part of Alban Avenue and Olga Street, the height is between 11 metres and 26 metres. For Anderson Street, the height is between 53 and 90 metres. There are clauses in regards to the transition of the CBD strategy to the LEP. There are clauses already introduced to the LEP addressing, for example, design excellence. There are also proposed changes in the draft LEP on public exhibition that have regard to the one-to-one commercial component, the active street frontages, urban heat, with the objective being to reduce urban heat by various means, including sufficient tree canopy, open space and deep soil zones, and lastly, affordable housing. Mapping changes that accompany the LEP draft involves special provisions area map, addressing affordable housing and design excellence, the active street frontages map, and the minimum lot size map. In regards to the transition of the CBD strategy to the DCP covers those controls not captured in local environmental plans. It should be noted that the section of the DCP relating to the Chatswood CBD is Part L, place-based plans. Part L relating to the Chatswood CBD is based on the key elements of the CBD strategy. that are not addressed in the LEP. To ensure an appropriate human scale reflecting the different character within the Chatswood CBD, 11 precincts have been identified with regards to setbacks and street wall heights. These include the Victoria Avenue retail frontage, an urban core, an office core, mixed use frontage with commercial ground floor, a Pacific Highway frontage, a southern precinct, an Albert Avenue precinct, an Anderson Street interface precinct, a Bertram Street interface precinct, Albert Avenue North, an Olga Street interface precinct, and a Johnson Street interface precinct. These setbacks involve ground level as well as tower above podium setbacks. In addition, specific street wall heights have also been identified for each precinct. This slide shows pedestrian and cycling linkages, which are sought to improve existing access through the CBD. New linkages and publicly accessible open space and areas are also sought. So this link is not the end of what the council expectation is, as expressed in the DCP. The CBD strategy controls in Part L also address site amalgamation, embellishment of public domain, through site links as already discussed, maximum floor plate size to assist in the slender tower objective, soft landscaping and green roof controls, minimised vehicle entry points, physical loading solutions below ground in basements, minimised car parking rates close to the Chatswood transport interchange, provision of public art. It should be noted that where a matter is not covered in Part L, it is the other sections of the draft of the DCP will apply. The other point that I wanted to make was that in addition to the LEP and the draft DCP, Council is fully cognizant that other strategies or plans need to accompany the changes that are proposed in the Chatswood CBD. And in that vein, the Chatswood Public Domain Draft Plan has been developed. Council is very much aware that appropriate planning, management and embellishment in response to the CBD strategy and the LEP and DCP changes are required. The objective of this plan is for Chatswood CBD to become a connected, diverse and vibrant green community for Chatswood. These last slides that I just wanted to show you are examples of future images that are envisaged for the Chatswood CBD. They are based on planning proposals that have been through council and finalised, and they show slim towers, two-storey podium presentations, particularly to the Pacific Highway, ground level setbacks, green planting to streets within setbacks, non-residential uses within podiums, and publicly accessible ground level open space that is reinforced by public rights of way. That's the end of my presentation, and I wanted to thank you for the opportunity, and now I'll hand over to Ian Arnott in regards Chatswood and Chatswood West.
Thank you very much for that, Craig. That was a lot of information to distill tonight, I think. So hopefully you've benefited from the very great detail that Craig has provided in terms of the CBD, in terms of the new draft LEP and DCP controls that we're proposing. And thank you for the comments that we've been receiving throughout that presentation on the webinar. I'll now hand over to Ian and ask if he could go quite fast because we want to make sure we finish at 7:30. Thank you.
Thanks, Norma and Craig, and thanks everyone for participating or being part of this webinar. As Norma said, there's a lot of information that we're giving out to you, and it will be available on the on our website for you to go back over, and we are all available to help with any future questions as well. But I do want to leave time for questions tonight as far as possible, so I will try and get through this. My focus is on housing, and largely on the lower density areas of Chatswood. Craig's given a great rundown of the CBD, but I'm going to be looking at those other areas of Chatswood, such as West Chatswood or the other areas around the CBD. So we, as Norma had mentioned, we undertook a housing strategy that came into effect, or was endorsed by Council, I think, and the Department of Planning in 2020, I think I'm correct in saying. And that had three main areas of focus for new housing. As Norma had mentioned, we require a target of 6,700 new dwellings in the Willoughby local government area through to 2036. And so it had three focus areas for that new housing. Probably, or the main area of housing uptake that we envisage is in that area that Craig talked about, the area that was shown as mauve around the CBD in the plan that he showed. So around the CBD core, providing increased housing in that location. We also have undertaken local centres strategy, and there is some opportunity for uplift in housing or dwelling numbers in those local centres. In fact, for this webinar, there are no local centres that have been identified as proceeding in the Chatswood West or in the immediate surrounding area of Chatswood, but there are centres such as the Pencer Street, Victoria Avenue local centre not far from Chatswood. And the third area is the existing residential flat zones that we have. The reason that we're focused on those three main areas is to protect our low density areas. We see the value of the low density areas of the Willoughby Council area as providing a very nice character, a very green character, a garden character for those suburbs, and for the intrusion of great, to achieve the dwelling numbers, the option is to spread out or to go up in effect. And we saw the concentration in areas that are easily accessible, close to public transport, close to services such as the CBD particularly, but also our other local centres and the residential flat zones around those centres as the best place to provide that additional accommodation. And in doing so, protecting those low density areas and our conservation areas as well. So the main changes that the LEP is bringing into effect in respect to housing, and there are some quite significant ones, so I will try and talk more to those. But for those areas that aren't the heritage conservation areas or the environmental living zones, which are the natural conservation areas, if you like, the state policy, state environmental planning policy, exempt and complying development codes applies. And that has been in place for quite a long time, allowing dwelling houses to a particular scale and form that satisfy the state government controls. And those don't have any form of merit assessment. They're just, if they satisfy the controls, they're approved, and not always by council. They can be approved by private certifiers through the private certification. If any component of that isn't compliant, it does need a development application. And we've seen that provides a lack of equity, that in the streets, you can get one dwelling that is approved by a complying development at a certain scale and density, and the house next door, simply because a minor component of that didn't tick a box, is subject to a whole different range of controls. So I'm going to talk through that in a minute, but part of our what we're seeking to do with the LEP and DCP controls is to align more with that state policy to provide a greater level of equity in what can be done on sites. The exception to that is in the landscape control. And as I mentioned, we see the green character, the garden character of our suburbs as a really important thing to retain into the future, both for that character element, but also for to address the urban heat effects of hard surfaces and increased built form. So to provide opportunities for more canopy tree planting, etc. So we've strengthened those controls by incorporating them into the local environmental plan, which is a stronger legal document than the development control plan. Similarly, dual occupancy provisions were introduced into the state policy. The state government introduced exempting complying development code policy in the middle of 2020, allowing dual occupancy to be done as complying development, again, with a ticker box, no merit assessment, a ticker box way of assessment that if you satisfy the controls, you'll get approval, and that can be done again by council or a private certifier. So again, to provide that equity, we've sought to align our controls with those state government controls. And then in that case, that where one particular standard isn't met, it's in effect that non-compliance that we'll be assessing in the context of the DA. Although the whole development needs to assessment, but where it complies with everything else, it's really focusing on that area of non-compliance. I'll also talk a little bit about what are called manor houses, another form of complying development provision that's allowing what are called manor houses. It's essentially what you might have seen in the 1930s and 40s, is built as a block of 4 flats, 2 upstairs, 2 downstairs. It doesn't have to take that exact form, but it allows a 2-story form up to 4 dwellings on the one site. And we're introducing a minimum lot size control related to that. And I'll also talk about our affordable housing provisions. So just to look at the sorts of dwellings that have been approved under complying development, if you look at the left-hand side, the 2 on the left-hand side have been approved under complying development, and the 2 on the right-hand side, or the 3 in effect, when you look at the 2 in the bottom bottom picture, have been approved as development applications. And so you can see that to a large extent, there's not a huge amount of difference, particularly from a streetscape perspective, on the scale of development that is being approved under the existing controls in reality. Now, this is a bit of a complicated table, but I'm just going to take you through it, not each line. I'm just going to explain just what we're doing here with our floor space control. So traditionally, and the way our current LEP is written, has a floor space ratio control. That's the ratio of the floor space of a building. So it might be over 2 floors to the site area on which it sits. For example, you might have 1,000 square metre site area, have a 0.5 to 1 floor space ratio. And if you've got a 2-story building, that would enable you, if they were both the same size each floor, 250 square metres on each floor. That's an example of what floor space ratio is, and that's the way our controls have been written to date. If you see on the left-hand side of that first table, the site area, if you go down to where it says 301 to 400, and the 400 gives you at a floor space ratio of 0.5 to 1, if you go to the right-hand column, gives you 200 square metres. We all know that 0.5 of 400 is 200. However, if you go to 401 square metre site area, on the next line down, you only get 188.5 square metres of floor space. So in that instance, you're getting a larger lot size, a larger site area, but you're getting less floor space. So it's not a continuum. It doesn't run as a continuum through. If we look at the right-hand table, it's what the state policy complying development provisions apply, and that's not known as a floor space ratio control. That's a gross floor area control. In essence, it's coming out with the floor space you can achieve, but it's referred to in a different way and measured slightly differently. And in this instance, it does provide a continuum through, so that wherever you're increasing your site area, you're getting an increase in floor space as well. So I just want to show you an example of how that might result in a development. This is a development that was done as a development application, had a site area of 620 square metres. Under our local environmental plan, 266.7 square metres was permissible. In fact, 303 square metres was approved in this instance, so it was above what was permissible under the LEP, and you can seek variation to standards. Under the housing code or the exempt and complying development code, 335 square metres would be achievable, and that's what we're proposing to incorporate into the draft LEP. I want to talk about landscaping because, as I said, we are seeking to align with the complying development code for dwelling houses, but not in respect to landscaping because of the importance we see landscaping to have in our area. And this is a comparison of the landscaping provisions between our existing development control plan landscaping control and what we have incorporated into the draft local environmental plan and the complying development provisions. And you can see that on the left-hand table, our existing and proposed controls exceed those in the complying development controls. These slides will be made available and the webinar will be available on our website following tonight. This is an example of how that's applied. So you can see we've got the floor space. In this instance, the local environmental plan currently allowed on this site 279 square metres. The approval, and this one was a complying development code approval, gave 300, was approved at 312 square metres, even though they could have achieved 335 square metres under the complying development code. Our control would require and does require 266 square metres of landscaped area, whereas the complying development control would only require 195 square metres. In this example, they provided 255 square metres, only slightly less than our standard, even though under the complying development, they could have had a lot less natural landscaping. And that's, so as I've said, we're wanting to enforce that landscaping provision. So those are how we're seeking to align our dwelling house provisions with the housing code. As I mentioned, dual occupancy is also a permissible form under the exempt and complying development provisions. I just want to run through the different forms of dual occupancy that there are. So if we start at the top left-hand corner, it's known as attached side-by-side dual occupancy, and it's an attached form of dual occupancy. The one on the top right-hand corner is attached, one above the other. The one on the bottom left corner is detached dual occupancy on a corner site. So one behind the other, but both with a street frontage. And the one on the bottom right-hand side is detached in a battle axe formation. Now, the complying development provisions allow for the first three forms of dual occupancy as complying development, but not the battle axe form in the bottom right-hand corner. We're also seeking to align with the complying development provisions in that respect. It's evident even in that example there that the battle axe formation intrudes into the backyard zone of the residential areas. It has the potential to cause overlooking, overshadowing of backyards and bulk impacts to those backyards, and it removes that garden character and the opportunity for the canopy tree planting. So it is it is not permissible under the complying development provisions, and we're seeking to align with that as well. I'm just going to run through here how our controls would change under the draft LEP. And I'll give an example in a minute, but the floor space ratio, or in this instance, gross floor area controls, are measured in that way for different forms of dual occupancy. The landscape control, again, we're not adhering to what the state policy suggests. We're saying that if you have a dual occupancy in a low density residential area, then the landscaping provision should be the same as that is provided for a single dwelling house. And again, we're incorporating that into the local environmental plan. So what we're seeking to do is, again, protect that landscaping provision. What it does result in is potentially more floor space at an upper level. And but as I've said, that floor space can be achieved in the complying development provisions at the moment. The other change that we're doing to dual occupancy is that in the current LEP 2012, you can, if you do a dual occupancy under council's LEP, you can't subdivide that dual occupancy until 5 years after completion. That's not the case for complying development dual occupancy. That can be subdivided immediately, and we're seeking to align with that as well. So here are some examples of dual occupancy. This is an attached side-by-side form. And for our provisions, both existing and proposed, you need a minimum of 700 square metres floor space for attached. I'm very conscious of the time, sorry. So I'm going to try and keep going as fast as possible. So that would mean 292.2 square metres on this site, which is what was proposed and approved for this site. Under the control, a significantly greater gross floor area could be achieved, 482.6. So that is a big increase in floor space that can be achieved. However, the landscaped area provision under the current controls is 255.7 square metres. 311 square metres was provided in this instance. Under the complying development, it would have been 265 square metres. And we're saying under the new controls, it will be 308 square metres required. So we're really seeking to ensure that landscaping provision is provided on sites, even though the built form, the dwelling itself or the dual occupancy itself may be of a larger scale, consistent with that achievable under the complying development code. This is just another example of a detached, in this instance, a 964 square metre site, because detached is only permitted both existing and proposed on sites greater than 900 square metres. Our LEP allowed 384. However, the draft LEP would allow 541, so significantly greater floor space. The landscaped area under the existing DCP, Development Control Plan, 337. Under the state policy, 382, and under our draft LEP, 431. So, and we have done some testing of this as to whether this floor space and this landscape provision is achievable, and we've determined that it is. However, it will mean potentially more floor space at upper levels. And as I mentioned before, the battle axe form of subdivision wouldn't be permissible. Battle axe form, sorry, of dual occupancy wouldn't be permissible under the new LEP. I just quickly want to talk about manor houses. That form that I mentioned before, under the SEP, they can be done on a 600 square metre site in residential flat zones or zones where residential flat development is permissible. We see that that's not helping to achieve our dwelling numbers or our dwelling target numbers that we've been set, and that it would, so we see that it's preferable to identify a minimum lot size of 1,100 square metres, which we say is the minimum lot size for other forms of residential flat development, to seek to consolidate sites and get more dwelling outcome from those lots. And just quickly, affordable housing. So our LEP at the moment has 4% within the, in addition to the floor space achievable on the site. So a minimum of 4% of affordable housing to be dedicated for use as affordable housing through a management scheme. Our local strategic planning statement said that we would increase that to 7% by 2021 and 10% by 2026. We're past 2021. It takes a long while to get things in place, and we're going straight to the 10% under the draft LEP. And that is within the permissible floor space, not in addition to. There is a feasibility report that has been done by SGS Planning and Economics that will also be on exhibition and is available on our website in the documentation. I just want to quickly go through the DCP, which is at present a very large document. It's the supporting document to the local environmental plan, and it will continue to be a large document, but we've sought to reduce it somewhat and also to make it a more readable document. So there are 12 different parts, and I'll be talking to some of those parts very quickly. Primarily in respect to the residential aspects. So we've tried to make it a more user-friendly document as far as possible, and that's been incorporating other sections into the controls of the development type that you're looking at. So if you're doing a residential dwelling type, you preferably would only need to go to one section of the DCP. Now, that's not quite the case. There are some things that sit outside of that. So the residential component is part B of the development control plan, and it has separated things into minor and major. Minor being the low density residential type of development, the major being residential flat development, shop top housing development, that sort of thing. As I've mentioned, the R2 zone, the alignment with the SEP, the C4 zone, which was previously E4. So that's the environmental living zone. As Norma mentioned, the state government has already made the changes to the terminology here. It's now known as the C4 zone. There is some additional documentation that would be sought in submission of applications, just to ensure that if you're adjoining bushland or you're potentially close to Aboriginal items of Aboriginal significance, really letting you know the type of documentation that would be required to be submitted, such as flora and fauna reports or heritage assessments. And again, the landscape controls are in the local environmental plan. In respect to heritage conservation areas, we've sought to strengthen the controls. We're not in any way, we see the value of our heritage controls within the DCP and of our heritage conservation areas. And we really just want to reinforce that it's not about, a conservation area is about retaining that heritage of the area. It's not about demolishing those buildings and replacing them with something that looks the same. It's about retaining the elements that contribute to the significance of that area, of the conservation of the area. And so just in doing that, we've identified the information that we generally ask for if someone does seek to demolish their contributory building. We're just specifying what sort of documentation would be required to try and justify that. It's something that we don't favour, but if someone really thinks that they should be able to demolish their house, we're saying what documentation you would need to submit in that. We're also incorporating controls around semi-detached development or buildings, where alterations and additions to those are being sought. We haven't, our DCP is lacking a little bit in that area at the moment. And also just in reinforcing the importance of the external fabric and streetscape. And for the R3, the residential flat zones, there's not a lot of difference in our controls from what is currently in the development control plan. However, we are aligning with the apartment design guide, which is the state government document that has to be satisfied anyway. We've also incorporated deep soil controls to ensure, again, we're maximising our landscape opportunities. Sorry. For the Chatswood CBD, as Craig mentioned, you would go to the area that applies, the Part C or, for commercial development, and if you're doing a shop top housing, Part B. But the Part L is the place-based controls, and that's probably where you would start if you're doing something in the CBD, and then where there's inconsistency with the other controls, you would look at the other controls. Where there's inconsistency, the Part L would prevail. And just quickly, some other parts of the DCP that may need to make reference to if you're residential, the transport and parking management, where we're seeking to implement our integrated transport strategy, and that's particularly in respect to travel demand management, where you're close to transport nodes, minimising or reducing car parking, and which in turn reduces traffic congestion in those areas. Vegetation management was recently changed, and there's minimal further change to that. Similarly with water management provisions, and similarly building sustainability. Sorry I've taken up a lot of time and there's a lot to digest, but hopefully we'll be able to get a few questions.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you. That was very helpful. And I know we've seen some commentary that some of these slides were delivered on the launch webinar evening, but we believed it was important to reinforce every webinar with those slides. But we'll take a sounding on that as we've had some response back on the webinar questions this evening. So I think probably we've only got 5 minutes left to end on time. Has anybody in the chamber got a question they might want to ask us? And we'll bring a microphone to you if you want to put your hand up.
I would like to...
Hang on a second, if you can just take the microphone, because that'll be able to be heard.
Sorry to take your time, but it's quite fascinating, a lot of hard work. And I tend to, of course, look at my own circumstances, being there for 46 years. But I would like to have heard about the planning of parking and also the movement of traffic. I do live in Sydney Street. It's been punished badly for 20 years. And I've been in contact with my good friends in Willoughby Council. I've also been rescuing people who've been in accidents, contrary to with our friends that they look after roads. We've had accidents. We've had some bad accidents. We have people killed. But more important than that is, for the overpopulation coming out suddenly, all of a sudden, you're pouring a pint into a half-pint bottle, which is part of the problems when you're trying to do, as you're doing, a very good job of planning. But it's very challenging indeed. But I mean, these are fundamental flaws. And but I think there should be some definite, and I in fact intend to write, because we have other people asking me questions for other reasons. But I think it's important that we have a good look at some of the places. There's a lot of silence of decisions being made over the last few years, which will have a big impact on this industry. Now, that's very selfish perhaps, but it's not.
Well, if I can just jump in and make an attempt at a response. Your question really is about how we're going to manage all this traffic in terms of growth. And the fundamental question I've also seen on the conversation tonight about growth, is it inevitable? Well, local government has to respond to growth, because that is what awaits us all. There is no diminishment to growth. It may change its pace over the years, particularly with things like the COVID pandemic and the reduction in migration particularly. But growth is an inevitable thing, and the state government requires each local government to respond to that growth appropriately. So that's why we are planning for the scale of growth that we've been delivered from the North District Plan, from the Greater Sydney Commission, and that's how where we take our lead for the growth in the planning we do. And we know that you can't continue to grow and continue to expect traffic to remain the same. Congestion will be a problem that we will also have to address at the same. They're challenges rather than flaws. There's significant challenges, and travel demand management is an approach we take in Willoughby to try and control the amount of traffic that is generated by new developments, so that we encourage more active transport to occur, including the use of public transport, which is why we're trying to locate most of our growth around those major transport interchanges, so people can actually access that good transport without having to get in a vehicle and drive to it. They can walk or they can cycle to it, and they can easily access it. And that is a more sustainable approach, we believe. Now, I'm sorry if that's not been a full response to your question, but we've only got a couple of minutes left this evening. And I wanted to maybe take one question from the webinar before we close. So if I can just ask Tanya to suggest one question.
Thanks, Norma. This one's in relation to, it's from Richard. In the Sun Herald, the 20th of March, tree cover has reduced in Willoughby City Council to 41% in 2020, by 3% from 2016. Does the plan address this to increase cover?
Thanks for the question. I had actually read that article in the paper myself, and was surprised at the figures they gave. Not surprised in the reduction, because I think we all are aware that there has been a reduction. I think it referred to 3% reduction, but surprised that they estimated the existing canopy cover to be 41%. Our estimate, I think, was 36%, and in about 2016, 36% canopy cover, and we had a target to increase that to 40% by 2036. So they say we're at 41%, but dropping or have dropped. We acknowledge that there is a lack of canopy cover, and we're seeking to increase that canopy cover, we say, by 4% to 2036.
Good, thanks, Ian. And I'm sorry, everybody, but that has really drawn us to the end of the webinar this evening. All the questions that have been posed on the webinar will be answered. So it's not a matter that you won't get a response from us. You definitely will, as we've made clear on our responses thus far this evening. I'll just turn to the next slide, and I'll sit where Ian's sitting.
Norma, just on the questions, we might group some of the like-for-like ones rather than respond to every single question, because there is a lot in there.
Yes, we had a very good response this evening. I noticed that some of it was quite passionate. So we will try and, as Tanya says, group them together and provide a group response to the questions of the same nature. So just in conclusion, everybody, and particularly to those who've ventured out tonight from the comfort of your own home, thank you very much for doing that and joining us here. The draft LEP and DCP will be on exhibition until the 7th of June. So it's already been on for 2 weeks now. And this is only the second of a series of, I think, 11 webinars we're going to be having, mainly focused on local areas as we go. And so we'll be able to provide answers to those local questions and give specific detail. But all the feedback that we've received today in the webinar and the questions that have been asked, they'll be included in a feedback report that we'll have done at the end of the period. And that report will go to council, and council will be advised about what everybody's been saying, what their responses has been, and whether we need to amend the draft LEP and DCP again to respond to the community concerns or issues. And the finalisation for that report is expected to go to council around about October. Now, depending on whether or not we do have a lot of changes as a result of the exhibition, we may or may not finish the plan this year. It may have to go on exhibition again. So we might have to brace ourselves for a similar thing, which maybe we can have face to face and no longer masked up and in this very strange way that we communicate with each other these days. So it'll either be finished this year or at the end of middle or end of 2023. But please, I encourage you to look at all the information on the council's website. Tune into the webinars if they relate to your local area and you're interested, and make a submission to this exhibition, because we're very keen to hear your views, including those that have been made tonight. So thank you and good night to everybody from all the
I
team
just have
here.
one quick answer that I just wanted to give before we wrapped up. Just a question about how the questions will be answered. We'll send a response to all of the questions that cover tonight's session via email to everybody, but anything that's common that should be added to the Have Your Say website will include on the website to cover lots of the things that are common themes and things that are coming through.
That's made
Okay.
it very clear. Thank you, Tanya.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And again,
Good night.
Good night.
Happy budget.